the structure of systematic racism was a design. It wasn't just a thing that just kind of floated up and happened organically. No, it was designed to work, and it's working very efficiently.
Welcome to Anatomy of a Strategy. I'm Tara Hunt.
And I'm Stephanie Forster.
And if you're new here, Anatomy of a Strategy explores the hidden psychology and behaviors that drive marketing strategies.
This is the 5th official episode in a mini-series we're calling The Anatomy of White Supremacy in Marketing, where we're looking at all the ways in which marketing practices, institutions, and systems contribute to anti-Black racism and perpetuate white supremacy.
Yeah, but before we get into it, I do want to share a bit of news with you. So, as you know, because Stephanie introduced the last guest on her own, I took a much-needed break a few weeks ago. And with everything that's going on in the world, it's really been hard to focus, let alone stay productive and keep hustling and working. So unsurprisingly, keeping up with our regular podcast schedule has also been challenging.
Yeah, we had so many amazing guests join us recently, so we really wanted to ramp up production and even switch to a weekly format. But we found out that was burning us out pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to prioritize our health and our sanity, which I think is very important for anybody right now. So we'll be scaling back a bit on the podcast schedule. We'll still be releasing new episodes, just not at the pace we once were. And by the way, that is my dog running around behind us. We do need to have a pug appearance here every now and then. Anyway, back to it. Hopefully things will go back to, maybe they won't go back to normal, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, who knows when that will be.
Yeah. So I think, however, our chat with Shervonne Cherry comes at really the perfect time.
Yes. In this episode, like we said, we're talking to Shervonne Cherry. She's the Director of Community and Partnerships at Spark Co-working in Baltimore. And she's been in the Baltimore tech community for about 15 years.
Yeah, me and Shervonne go way back. We met years ago in Baltimore at an After the Wire. Yes, this is in reference to the fictional series on TV. So After the Wire conference, or unconference rather, where we talked about urban design and racism. And in this conversation that we're having today, Shervonne talks about the practice of redlining, which is very, very relevant to the current landscape.
Yeah, as Shervonne says, the system isn't broken. It was designed to work that way. There's a long, terrible history of redlining in urban centers, and Baltimore is one of the most obvious examples. And as the election approaches, these racist design decisions are going to be front and center.
Yeah, as a designer, the director of community partnerships at a co-working space, and as a Black woman, Shervonne has a very clear view of how urban design perpetuates racism and segregation.
I think we should just jump into it.
Absolutely. Here we go.
Stephanie, I am so excited to have Shervonne Cherry here with us on Anatomy of a Strategy, all the way from my favorite city in the whole wide world, Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Forgive me if I'm like this ignorant outsider, but Baltimore, which has a bit of history of booms and busts, ups and downs. And what I learned when I went there a couple of times and why I fell in love with the city is that it had a huge boom era. It was, where Detroit was where all the automotive manufacturing was happening, and Baltimore was where all of the other manufacturing was happening. And in fact, it was a real, because of your amazing location next to the ocean, within the harbor, like manufacturing was huge in Baltimore. And then outsourcing happened. And a lot of those jobs left overseas along with the factories going overseas, and that was pretty devastating for a certain population. And mostly the Black communities who were working in those factories. So I know that when I was there, that a lot of the discussion at the time, and this was quite a few years ago, I think it was at least 7 or 8 years ago, a lot of the discussions that were happening were like, how do we invest in the Black community to create more entrepreneurship? Is that something that Spark is doing, proactively reaching out to the Black community, or is it just something that happens naturally? How are you addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both. It's organic and it's intentional. And I for me, that sort of recipe mix is very comfortable. I don't think if you go in any direction that's only organic or only intentional, and this is personal preference, I like to have kind of a nice mix of those two worlds coming together. You have to have some sense of purpose and intentionality in what you're doing to make sure that you have a goal. And then having that sort of organic things happening and kind of piling on to build that momentum and build that mountain is like kind of in my eyes a true optimal sort of situation. So for Spark, we follow that philosophy. We seek intentional programs, opportunities, individuals that are members or even non-members, people who, and individuals who are aspiring to start businesses or looking to engage with their ecosystem in some sort of avenue. And that's one of the reasons why I'm currently involved in an organization or a platform called eShip Communities. The Kauffman Foundation is currently piloting this program through Forward Cities. And eShip Communities is a 4-city pilot. Baltimore is one of them. And our specific focus is Black entrepreneurship. And like you said, when you were here in Baltimore, there was talk of it then, there's talk of it now. Everyone always has an idea or a focus or this is the way we need to lead. But there's no right answer. There's no right one path to get to the end goal. And I was very comfortable joining that committee. It's a committee made up of about 12 ecosystem builders in the Baltimore ecosystem, of color, some not of color, who have this same goal. And knowing that we need to typically what happens in Baltimore and in other cities as well, you have sort of this overcoming sort of, hey, I have a great, I'm going to help you. I'm going to come in and dive and save your city, save Baltimore.
The white knight.
The white knight. I'm going to come in and, Baltimore, especially in the last, for decades, but especially after the uprising with Freddie Gray, there was a lot of that coming in 2015. And from there, that's great, awesome, but it's just not well. And there's the intention there is more of, I want to be the savior and I'm going to fix you. And they don't gain the trust of the community. They're not really actively engaging with the community at large, because you really have to understand the dynamics of our city to understand that it's not just the people at the top. The people at the top that you see sort of front and center constantly are just one subset, and the people who are actually on the boots on the ground doing the work, they're doing the dirty work, so to speak, making sure things get done. So for that intentionality, my work with this organization and this committee so far, it's fairly new. We launched in fall of 2019. COVID hit, so we've had some shifts there, but that's also led to more organic things happening. And there's sort of, I always find pleasure in the serendipitous and the I'll be punny right now, the charm of Charm City and the small-to-more nature of what Baltimore is. We're always called Baltimore. And in our town, we have this sort of sense of hustle and grind and grit, where we're really willing to help support and give a supportive hand and whatever you need. So we really get excited. I know I personally get excited when I see folks who want to engage with our city, want to engage with our entrepreneurs, especially our entrepreneurs of color, and they mean well. And they're not just here to check off a box, and they're not just here to fill a quota or to get data for a pilot program or whatever it is. They're actually here to gain trust, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be successful if you don't have trust from the community that you're engaging with. So that's kind of how we gauge for me personally, that balance of organic and intentionality is really key.
Yeah, that's amazing. So in as far as membership in Spark goes, you have a good number of Black entrepreneurs and people of color entrepreneurs as far as that goes?
I think a lot of people, when they hear talk like that, they automatically assume quotas, affirmative action, I need to get my numbers up, and they don't think about how are you actually working with and supporting everyone in your city. And my goal is not to be sort of a space for one type of person. My goal is to be a space where anyone with an idea or has that entrepreneurship sort of drive and bug within them can feel comfortable and secure, and they feel like they have a soft landing spot to be able to build their organizations and their businesses and their teams. And traditionally with Black entrepreneurs, that comfort level is not there, especially in Baltimore. You have the Black butterfly, you have a corridor where there's communities that have been affected generationally by redlining in our city. And when you're looking at how people are building businesses or trying to work within existing teams or find jobs or just transportation for that nature is just tough. And so one of the goals for Spark specifically is, and I also have the benefit of having corporate backing for our organization. We're a privately funded co-working space. And that's, for me, it's sort of a beautiful thing in a way. I don't want to be too fluffy here with that, but I kind of have this space where we have a community ecosystem, small business mindset, and that's what our focus and goals are. But then we have resources that can really help perpetuate and build those goals up. And we're not affiliated with a university. We're not affiliated with any particular private sector company or, those particular goals that come into the commercial real estate world. Yeah. And that gives a lot of freedom to be able to partner and support and just be able to really, truly do the work that our mission states for us to do. So I'm constantly, as myself, I'm kind of like the ambassador of Spark. I always tell our team members, you're an ambassador for our brand, but we're always just looking for what can we do better to improve Baltimore as a city. And this may not be a popular, comment for, some people, but if we're not the right space for a particular company, I'm going to refer them to another space in Baltimore. Or if they're looking specifically for wet lab space as a bioscience, I'm going to refer them to another space, because we all work together in our communities. And I think that is what is extremely important for, what we're doing, our goal.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you keep talking about like culture and how important it is for community. And I think that's especially important for a co-working community. But when I think about, like WeWork and some of the controversies that have happened there, that maybe they weren't quite so welcoming, I'm wondering, like, how do you create a vibrant, inclusive co-working culture that differentiates you guys from some of the other co-working spaces that haven't been so successful in that regard?
Yeah. One, when you walk in, you're seeing women and brown faces, that's a very direct sort of thing. I laugh at that, but I don't think people really understand when a younger, person of color or woman walks into a space and they expect one thing and they're given something else in a positive manner. I've had folks who have come in and, on the negative side, they're like, well, who's your boss? Who can I speak with about this? Because they don't think that I'm like the deal maker, or in that sort of phrase. But then I love when we have especially young entrepreneurs who they're still working full time, but they're trying to hustle and start and launch their own startup or business. And we're just talking with them. And usually I'm always talking with them about my own experience and how I've gone through the ecosystem in Baltimore. And you can kind of feel the tension kind of go away. And it's not a business transaction at that point. I think that's what sets us apart from other spaces and other of those very global corporate commercial real estate types of spaces. We're genuinely interested in what their goals are. You know, they're not just a number. They're not just another office that we're checking off a list. It's, oh, great, you just moved to Baltimore? Awesome. What neighborhood are you in? Do you need some insight? So it's not just their company we're interested in. We're interested in them as a person. And when you go into that sort of personal sort of level and you can help them find a daycare solution for their child, or in the world of COVID, if you can put them in the right direction for, you know, whether it's testing or information or, you know, housing that may help them for more social distancing, and we can assist them with that. That's our goal, because work life, as we know, there's no such thing as work-life balance. One, we can forget that nomenclature, but my husband is very attuned to this, and he is not like me working all the time. But we understand that when you're that entrepreneurial life, that startup life is just constant. It's a constant grind. It doesn't stop. So for us, part of that supporting their needs is creating a space and a culture that is supportive and is inquisitive and is always sort of staying connected to what they're doing, because that drives their fire, that drives when they know that they have someone who genuinely cares about what they're doing, the MVP that they're about to like launch, the pilot program that they're trying to get into, the Series A funding that they're really nervous about jumping. When they know they have a cheerleader behind them that doesn't have ill intent, it makes a difference, you know, and especially when that person is of not typically what is perceived in a certain industries. I think that does set a tone, that there's a sense of belonging, and I'm not just a face. And I tell it to people. There's a lot of organizations, unfortunately, especially now in the last couple of months, we've seen the theater of allyship and the tokenism that is playing out. And I tell folks, you know, just be genuine in your goals and what you're doing. And that can really set you apart. You know, I kind of had a joke with quite a few of my friends of color. We've been talking about, you know, George Floyd and everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter. And a few of us are like, whoa, so many white women have texted us the past few weeks, you know, just to, and
oh no, I have too.
Well, but it's very interesting, and I may be going on a tangent here, but
no, it's all good.
It is very interesting, because a good friend of mine made a really great point. She said they're following directions, you know, like, I mean, everyone's saying check in with your friends of color, check in with your Black friends. And yes, like, yeah, I appreciate that genuine check-in. That's exactly what we need. And some people want to just talk and others don't. It's still appreciated. I think what's exhausting in some cases is when you see the pandering play out, and you see a lot of the, oh, how can I put Black people in my marketing, and how can I, where do I find stock images? And they're all coming to you because you're a brown or Black face that they know. And I've had individuals who are like, well, you know, I know that you'll give me some really great insight on this, like in the middle of a work day while I'm trying to like do stuff. And that's another sort of aspect of this. You have this, I'm striving so hard to be an ally. Teach me. Well, you're asking us, brown and Black folks, for this information, and how do we support? But then you're sort of interrupting our lives and pay, and how are we getting paid? And, it's like, hey, like, are you going to compensate me for my time here? Sort of.
Yeah.
And, and I hate to kind of go down that route. That's not what I'm saying of compensation at all. But I think there's sort of a level of, I want to be connected. I want to learn. But then how do you sort of genuinely go through an education process without sort of tearing down the people, instead of like trying to oppress or tear down the people you're trying to learn from? It's a very delicate, complex.
And Shervonne, like, honestly, Google is right there at their fingertips. There is a ton of information out there. You are not anybody's Google. Like, I mean,
and
really,
it's also like, teach me, like, this is about me and my woke journey. And it's like, it's not really about you and your woke journey. Like, it's great that you're on a woke journey, but it shouldn't be about how you can be made more woke.
I think the whole, what's the band, the Lady Antebellum, and that's the prime example of, they're so woke, we have to change our name. And instead of checking to see what their new name was already under and the use case for that, and then the worst part of it, they find that it's being used. Oh, well, let's see if she'll just kind of give it to us. Oh, she's not. Oh, she wants to be compensated. Oh, we're going to have to sue her. Like, it's kind of like that's sort of this cycle of you're not getting the point of all of this, So it is very interesting. And I genuinely try to be very, very humble, very understanding. I will give some time, but other times I can't. And there was a time after George Floyd where I couldn't talk on it. I couldn't really speak on it because it's one of those things where, and even a friend of mine was like, well, did you know him? And I'm kind of like, well, after you constantly see black body after black body after black body just be treated in that manner. And when you have a litany of microaggressions in your own life or macroaggressions or things that are just blatantly said to you, and then you see it in media, and then you see it in your workplace, not my workplace currently, but when you see it in your workplace, you it's a weight on you. And I think that's what was so the tipping point with everything with George Floyd is it's just been going and going and going. And it was just the tinder that lit this whole thing on fire. And it's not going to go away. That's the thing. And I like I just said, I didn't really say anything. I think I, kind of said, I can't really talk about this right now. And I still really haven't given a statement per se. I don't think anyone needs to give statements, but I haven't really talked at length simply because I'm kind of curious of what people are going to do. It's been over a month and a half now. Are you still going to continue to talk about it? Are you going to pander? Is media going to pander for a few more months with the Black Lives Matter? Are the statements going to be done? But what are you actually going to do action-wise to change policies or, systems within your space and place? And that's what's going to be telling.
Yeah. Are you going to just go back to business as usual after it's okay to
with a few more stock images that have a few more Black people in them.
and that's what I'm truly sort of, kind of waiting on. You saw this big pivot of, okay, this commercial's not yet done. So let's swap out some people of color in here. Let's make sure that we're being representative. And that's wonderful and great, but it's more of a quota than actually getting down to the heart of the problem. And especially with marketing, marketers, and I mean, this is a general statement, they're really understanding the value and the worth of representation in marketing. I think it's really lost because marketers are so focused on the data and the demographics and the goal of whatever widget or product or whatever it is they're trying to focus on. And they get lost of, who is really our demographic? Because depending on who's marketing this or who's in the room, I just got off of watching Hamilton, the room where it happens, right? You know, that's who's in that room, you know, and the people say this all the time, you need to have representation in decision-making spaces. But even people who are in the right mindset and who are really true and genuine to their allyship can struggle with this and not even know that they're struggling, because then they're making a decision based on what they think should be represented. For example, you know, there's, you know, the sort of the mindset of dark skin versus light skin. And they may cast a woman of color in a commercial or a movie or whatever it is, but she's an acceptable Black person because she may have lighter skin. You know, at a very early age, my mother told me about the brown bag test, right? You know, and how that brown bag, I don't know if you probably have heard of this. This was an actual test. If you're ever in DC, please go to the Smithsonian African American Museum, excuse me. They actually, in one of their exhibits there, they explain this, and it's very well explained. That sort of was a measure of your worth. If you were darker than that brown bag, a brown paper bag, you were not as valuable or deemed as worthy as someone who was lighter than. And this is something that is perpetuated even now. I mean, I'm a huge Nina Simone fan, love her music and her background and her history and the politics that she stood for, whether as controversial as they may be. And a few years ago, when they were casting her movie, they casted a Black identifying Latina actress. Love her to death. Was Zoe Saldana, I believe is her name. Yeah. Love her as an actress. Love her. Was she the right fit for that movie? You know, it's the example of we'd rather put dark makeup and prosthetics on a name rather than hire a woman who exhibits not just the characteristics, but the movement and the vibe and the essence of the real person that they're trying to play. And kind of going back to representation, I know one thing that really stands out to me, and I see it as a sign of, you know, yes, we're getting there. We're getting there close. I think a few years ago now, I'm seeing it more and more, but commercials that actually have either interracial couples or Black couples or couples of multicultural descent who are happy and celebrating and being joyous. And people kind of may laugh when I say that, but that's not a normal thing that media has historically showed people in this country. And people are like, what are you talking about? It happens all the time. And I'm like, well, there may be stereotypes of Black people. There may be, something that's they're trying to, kind of throw out there, and it's a one-time thing and that's it. But I have to say the feeling when I'm sitting at home with my husband's Irish Italian, we've had conversations on race our entire relationship, right? Even though we don't want it to come up, it always comes up in some sort of fashion with someone else. But I have to say, when one of the first, it was many years ago, but I think it was one of the first national commercials we saw that had a couple that looked like us. And we had been together for many, many, many years at that point. And I was just like, I stopped. I was taken back. And that feeling of sort of this joyous, it's a bittersweet. It's sad because, why am I at that time in my mid-20s just seeing this? But it's also, maybe this is the start of something. And what surprised me the most was my husband, who cisgendered white male, it struck him. And I guess he just didn't realize, because when you don't check your privilege, or you don't realize you may have a level of privilege, and you see something like that, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. And he even was sort of taken back, and it was like this, kind of high five moment. But it's just, how do we continue that momentum, and how do we not make that a quota, or a one-time thing, but how do we ensure that what our focus for marketing and the demographics that we're targeting is not just going towards what we think the audience wants to see, but what actually represents the audience that we're selling to.
Yeah, when is it no longer remarkable, but also still remarkable? Like it still should be celebrated, but no longer remarkable. One of the things I've loved, and this sort of goes off into like more of the media space, is the streaming services have allowed for the pushing of a lot more diversity in content and stories and lead roles. I just finished watching I May Destroy You. I don't know if you've seen it. I won't know spoilers, but so good. And when you were talking about the kind of the whitewashing, the brown paper bagging, I guess, of Black representation in media, like that show, as far as the characters go, there is so much unsaid, but like represented in this like bold, proud, like amazing way. I'm a completely like Irish, Dutch background, like completely white girl, not having this like some of the same experiences that she's had, but also finding myself identifying with her on so many levels in as a creative, because she is a creative in the show. And just like what a amazing, I think we are seeing a lot of movement, but I don't know, and you can tell me if this translates in the day-to-day, right? Like representation is important, but how is that now translating into your life? You mentioned earlier when somebody comes into the space, they'll ask if they could speak to your manager, right? That's still something that is a reality, something that happens. And I think in marketing, representation is getting better, but perhaps there's more we can do to influence maybe that mix, the wonderful mix of organic and intentional that you're talking about.
I think part of that is making sure we're telling all the stories. I think part of the with representation and marketers doing that, it's understanding that just because my skin color is a certain way, or I've been either melanin challenged or melanin blessed, as I like to say, doesn't pigeonhole what my life experience has been. And I think historically, especially in America, there has been sort of this mindset or stereotype of Black people, inner cities, gang violence. And that's not, while that is an experience, that's not the only experience for people of color. And I think that sort of thought of, I can't relate to them because there's an assumption there that, I can't relate because she's a Black woman and she's probably from inner Baltimore City and she probably didn't get educated. And that can, I'm making an assumption here, but that can go through someone's head really quickly. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're making an assumption that they won't be able to relate to what I'm doing, or I won't be able to relate to what they're doing. But at the end of the day, and this is the very sort of kumbaya statement, but we're all human and we all have the same experience, whether we like to realize it or understand it or not. And I think that's what's so telling. I mean, there is very, very experiences that Black women specifically have in their lives that are true to them and true to just the nature of what it is to be a Black woman in America, or globally, right? But then there's just general experiences that doesn't mean that's the only thing that's defined by you. When I am talking to a prospect or just another company in general or an individual about Baltimore and our ecosystem, I always preface it as, I talk about my experience of supporting small businesses and startups. And while I say I'm not an entrepreneur myself, my goal is to be a support. And I'll go down something to kind of connect with them on. And that really, there's some people who are shocked because they don't expect a certain person to be leading a cohort of small businesses. And other people are really, they're fine with it. But I think breaking down that I guess I shouldn't say expectation, but assumption that just because my skin's a certain color doesn't mean that if I'm a white male, I'm a trust fund baby or grew up in the suburbs or whatever. Right. Or if I'm Black, I grew up on welfare and I'm in a single family household, because it can be completely vice versa and you don't really understand. I think the point I'm trying to get to is for marketing, it's really taking a step back and embracing the experience and not pigeonholing what that experience is at the end of the day. Because you don't know, when you look at someone, you have no idea what their history is, unless you do know what their history is, but you generally do not know what their history is. So just treat them like a human being, I mean, that's the core of feminism, right? Mm-hmm. Like every human is treated equally. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah. I love that because I bring it back to like marketing. It's almost like marketers have been obsessed with demographics for so long, and we find that to be very lazy marketing. Mm-hmm. So like we are targeting people of a certain education, of a certain age, who live in a certain area, who have a certain income level. And it's like, you're not really targeting people based on what they need and their experiences and what they're looking for in their lives and what solutions you can provide for them. You're just targeting these arbitrary demographics and hoping that that'll work for you. And I feel like a lot of what you just said speaks to that. What do you think about lazy marketing and demographics?
I mean, one, who's collecting the data?
Exactly.
I mean,
good point.
If your data is mute, if the people who are collecting the data is either biased or implicitly biased, or they just don't realize it. I mean, I think the issue, a lot of the issues with automated vehicles right now is a big thing with that, and facial recognition software. I mean, you have these data sets that were proficient, and they had thousands of data of photos, and they were using data sets that were primarily Caucasian faces, male faces. So what happens when someone like me is crossing the street and an automatic car, that's a design fail, but that's also a marketing fail of it. You want to make sure that your data is representative of not what you think you want to sell to, but everyone. And it is lazy marketing when you're just sort of not doing the due diligence. And as a marketer, I believe you need to go beyond what your client is expecting of you. I mean, that is obviously you want to do above and beyond of what your job entails. But if your if your client is saying, we want to fit in this sort of pigeonhole of clients, of course, you want to do your job, but it doesn't hurt to expand that and say, well, look what will happen with your brand, with your products, expectations, consumer outreach, if you expand this bubble. And this is the due diligence that we did as a marketing agency or a marketer. And by being, I guess, that sort of, I don't want to call it allyship, because it just should be being a good human,
Yeah.
But I think by not just sticking with the status quo and saying, okay, thank you for my information, and just regurgitating what they're giving you, do the due diligence and take the time to explore and dive deep, because they're not expecting it. So when they do get it back, it's something else that's different, that they're not just kind of used to the same sort of churning of the wheel, so to speak. And we need to be doing our due diligence. And and this goes for so many things, if you're not uncomfortable doing something, you're not doing it right. If you're trying to change a system or be an ally, and I've told this to many of my white friends who are, how do I be a good ally? If you're comfortable doing it, something's not right. If you're comfortable in this safe sort of place and with your allyship, you need to kind of recheck your goals and what you're really doing, because change is ugly. Change is transformative. And if you're not shifting from one place to another, you're really not doing anything at all. It's just theater. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing with the marketing industry. I mean, there's a lot of jazzy theater going on right now. But at the end of the day, what's your responsibility as a marketer? I mean, this is a really important turning point in our country, specifically. And I think that marketers do need to take a step back and really understand the value of what they're creating and the data that they're sort of information they're putting out there, because they're sort of, they're the man behind the curtain in a way. Everyone sees the sort of the pretty final act that we all sort of see, and they're the ones that can really shape and steer this boat in a direction that is positive for a lot of people in this country.
Amazing. I feel like that's like the winning end quote there. Wrap job. I have a million other questions, but I'm like,
love it.
Okay, well, maybe that's not the only mic drop, right, Steph?
Right, not at all. Wait, there's more.
As always, as soon as we thought the conversation had ended, we actually had even more of a conversation, and that's where Shervonne caught fire. Let's get back right back into it.
Yeah, so I will email you some links. Okay. So, and I also meant to send you a link. Have you heard of Shanta Spencer? She's Quell TV.
No.
Just for your own personal, it's Quell TV is an indie. It's basically kind of like the Netflix for Black content.
Oh, cool.
But they're focused on independently made Black films and short films and things like that. So I'll send you that link as well. But the Black Butterfly so I don't miss anything here. So 83 is one of the main corridors through to get into the city from the north part of the county of Baltimore County. And that corridor of 83, you have Mount Washington, Roland Park, Pimlico. You have these sort of historically affluent areas where the doctors and the lawyers of the 18 whatever, they would work downtown, but their homes were outside in those areas. But then you go beyond that, where that redlining started to happen. So that little center is all white, rich, very, different type of people. And I lived in Mount Washington too. So I'm guilty of living in the white part of the Black Butterfly. But then the Black Butterfly is all of those outlying communities that have that were redlined, these
working class.
Don't want to invest in, where a lot of Black community members live at West Baltimore, Park Heights. And it's so funny because Mount Washington, I lived in Mount Washington for 8 years. You have Pimlico Racetrack, where Pimlico, the second crown of the triple whatever racing happens. And then what they don't show you when they're showing you that racetrack is over yonder is Park Heights, which has been a historically neglected, majority Black neighborhood. I mean, there are so many resources and organizations that are going to support that community, but it's night and day compared to Mount Washington to Park Heights. And
I'm not proud to say, but because I was a huge fan of The Wire, and that's probably where I got my single story of Baltimore in the first place. When I was with Baratunde, I think Jason had organized for one of the writers from The Wire to sort of take us on a Wire tour.
Mhm.
And it took us through the area where all the boarded up houses were. And partway through that, both Baratunde and I looked at each other. We were like, oh, that we feel really bad about this. Like kind of like we're doing poverty tourism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're like, okay, let's move on. Cause it was stark, and it was like literally 2 blocks away from beautiful like houses and kind of hipster coffee shops and stuff. And then all of a sudden it was like rows and rows of boarded up houses with no grass in the yard anymore and stuff like that. So
That's what it's so, I mean, I know it's not, it's not only in Baltimore that happens, but the one street over, it's kind of like night or day. And people tend to, I guess, go down this path of, well, shame on them for not taking care of their community. But when you look at it was designed that way. It was literally designed and organized to work the way that it did. And one of the things, as my degree is in design, I have very design thinking focus. And when a lot of people talk about poverty-stricken neighborhoods and they really talk down of, well, they need to pick themselves up. Why are they taking care of their communities? And I say this was designed 100 years ago, and the design is working. Like, structure of systematic racism was a design. It wasn't just a thing that just kind of floated up and happened organically. No, it was designed to work, and it's working very efficiently. And that's where, when you see that butterfly of the city and those sort of marginalized communities in Baltimore, that's what's happening there. So it is very interesting it's so funny that you say when you came here, you kind of felt that way. I mean, I live here. And I say, check your privilege, and checking your privilege is not just a white person's job. It's everyone's job. Everyone has a level of privilege. And that goes back to the experiences that you've had and not making assumptions. I come from a place of privilege because I grew up in the suburbs. I lived in Baltimore, but I had trees, grass, and parking. When I graduated college, I lived in a part of Baltimore City that wasn't boarded up row homes, right? So I know for myself, even as a Black woman, I have a level of privilege because I am a cisgendered woman. I do come from a Christian background. I do have a college education. So with that, I try to use my power privilege from that range to also support those that may not have that same level of privilege. So I try to tell people it's not just a white-Black thing when it comes to privilege. White privilege is a thing. That's not disputing that. But it's definitely a range of just experience and things that you are going through. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Baratunde was in the back of that car with me too, and he had the same feeling. Like we both, he's been doing this, this work for years, and I think he was raised with some privilege as well. So like. Yeah, it wasn't a black-white thing in the back. It was like, oh, this is wrong.
This is a human. It's a human thing. And that goes right back to, don't mask. You don't use the skin color to kind of as an excuse to treat people, poorly. That may be the reason. But it's at the end of the day, it's a human problem that we all are experiencing. I think people think, well, racism, Black people need to fix that. No, everyone needs to fix that. That's not just a one subset issue.
Yeah, and I would also say that it's not a subset, one like group issue, but it's also, I think it's more of a white person issue because built the institutions and the systems and the red lines that created those conditions and designed those conditions very, absolutely.
We're kind of, not that we're like kind of living in a mice and living in an experiment, but when you have, especially in the world of like white privilege, good design, you don't notice good design. Well, I mean, you notice it, but it's on a very instinctual emotional level. Good design design isn't meant to be this thing where it's, art is for the human, design is for, the business side of things. And for design, that it's working well and efficiently if the folks that you're targeting don't realize they're being sold to. And that's essentially what this whole white privilege, the benefits of your skin, people don't realize that they're reaping the benefits of white privilege because it's been designed for them not to realize that. And that's what I always tell individuals, you're not going to realize that you have privilege and that your name on your resume, got you ahead of someone else who had a different looking name, or, that you were able to get off with a warning when you got pulled over for speeding, but some other people have not. So because for them, they've only had one experience because it worked for them. So yeah, it's the back to that, design aspect. It's unfortunately the design is working and not how we all want it to work.
Well, it's like, if we go into the defund the police side of things, a white person might be like, defund the police, but then who's going to protect us? But a Black person would be like, the police protect you? Like, what? That's screwed up. That's not my experience of the police.
And I come from a law enforcement background. Like not me personally, I'm sorry. My family comes from a law enforcement military and law enforcement background. So, I have family members who are officers, and, for them being Black men in this industry, in this, as a law enforcement officer, it's wow. Like there's a lot of things that they're dealing with, internalizing. It's a complex issue, and just historically what the use and the historic nature of what law enforcement was at the end of the day. And so anyway, I could talk about this for
I know forever, we could go on, and we don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you once again, Shervonne.
Okay, now that was the ultimate mic drop. Am I right, Steph?
Oh, yeah.
So thank you so much, Shervonne, for joining us. And you can follow her on Twitter at NOORDNRY Cherry. We'll put that in the show notes. That's no ordinary cherry with some vowels missing.
Yeah. So thank you to our content manager, Emo Samal, our audio engineer and editor, Joe Pacheco, and our incredible staff at Truly Inc. who help these stories come alive. The show is written and hosted by me, Stephanie Forster, and, of course, my co-host, Tara Hunt.
That's me. If you enjoyed this episode, there are many more to come. So please let us know what you think. If we missed criticisms, comments, bring it on. We want to hear from you. Subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Send your feedback, ideas, suggestions, and yes, even your complaints on Twitter. The podcast is found at Anatomy of a Strat. I'm found at Miss Rogue. And you can follow Stephanie at Stephanie with an F and then another F. We'll put those in the show notes as well.
Also, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts.
And share with your friends, colleagues, boss, family, anyone you would think that would benefit from listening.
Stay safe, stay sane, and take care of yourselves. I know we will. See you soon.
Adios.